When Fiona Blackwood uncovers a ledger that could topple an empire, she finds herself trapped between a ruthless enemy, a sister with devastating secrets, and a man whose loyalty she can't fully trust. Betrayal, love, and lies collide in a storm of fire. And in the end, the only way out is through a choice that could destroy everything, including herself. The rain had been falling for hours, soft at first, then with a relentless rhythm that seemed to echo the turmoil inside Fiona Blackwood's heart. The Blackwood estate, a sprawling manor perched on the cliffs of Windermere, had always felt like a fortress. But tonight it was more like a cage. Its walls, once echoing with warmth and laughter, now pressed down with silence, an oppressive silence that seemed to grow heavier with every drop of rain against the glass. Fiona stood near the tall bay window of the library, her reflection merging with the storm outside. At 58, she carried herself with the quiet strength of a woman who had weathered enough storms to know that survival was as much about endurance as it was about resilience. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, framed a face that bore lines not of weakness, but of wisdom. Her emerald eyes that had once been filled with unshakable faith in those she loved, now carried the weight of betrayal. It had been 3 years since her husband, Richard Blackwood, had died. His passing was sudden, brutal in its swiftness, leaving Fiona widowed and alone to carry the weight of his legacy. Richard had been more than just a husband. He was a partner, a confidant, the man who would steady her when the storms of life threatened to drag her under. His death left her with an ache that had never dulled, a hollow space in her chest that not even time could heal. But grief was not the only wound she carried. The deeper cut, the one that still bled quietly every day, came not from death, but from betrayal. The betrayal of those who should have stood beside her. The betrayal of family. She closed her eyes, drawing a steadying breath as a name floated like venom through her mind. Michael. Her own son. Her flesh and blood. Once, he had been her pride, the boy who used to run to her with scraped knees and wide, trusting eyes, asking for comfort only she could give. Now, he was a man who saw her as an obstacle, a relic of the past standing in the way of his ambitions. It wasn't just Michael. Others had joined in, circling like vultures, waiting for her to stumble, to fall. People who had once called her family. People she had trusted. People she had loved. And among them was her sister-in-law, Margaret, Richard's sister, who had wasted no time after his funeral to begin whispering poisonous doubts into Michael's ear. Doubts about Fiona's strength, about her ability to lead, about her very place in the Blackwood estate. Fiona tightened her grip on the glass of wine in her hand. Her knuckles whitened as she remembered the coldness in Michael's eyes the last time they had spoken. It had been weeks since then, weeks of silence that cut deeper than any argument ever could. She could face enemies outside these walls. She could battle strangers, rivals, even faceless shadows. But to face betrayal from within her own blood, that was the kind of wound that never truly healed. The sound of footsteps pulled her from her thoughts. They echoed down the marble hallway, deliberate, steady, and too familiar. Fiona set her glass down, turning just as Maisie, the housekeeper who had served the Blackwoods for over 2 decades, appeared at the doorway. "Mrs. Blackwood," Maisie said softly, her Scottish accent coloring her words, "he's here." Fiona's heart skipped. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the chair beside her. "Michael?" she asked, though her voice betrayed none of the storm inside her. Maisie nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "He insisted on seeing you. I thought it best not to refuse." For a moment, Fiona wanted to say no. She wanted to lock the door, retreat into the silence, and pretend he no longer existed. But she was Fiona Blackwood. She was not a woman who turned away from confrontation. "Show him in," she said finally, her voice calm, steady. When Michael entered, the air shifted. He carried himself with the same confidence Richard once had, but where Richard's presence had inspired trust, Michael's carried an edge of arrogance. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp features that mirrored his father's. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, were nothing like Richard's warm gaze. "Mother," Michael said, his tone clipped formal. Not the way a son should address his mother, but the way a businessman might address a rival. "Michael," Fiona replied, her voice equally guarded. She gestured toward the leather chair across from her. "Sit. Let's not waste time." He didn't sit. Instead, he stood near the fireplace, staring into the flames as though he drew strength from them. "I've come because things can't go on like this," he said, his voice tight with frustration. "The estate, the company, the family, it all needs stronger leadership. You're holding on to something that no longer belongs to you." Fiona felt her chest tighten, but she kept her face calm, her voice cool. "And who do you believe it belongs to, Michael? To you? To me? To Margaret? To those who actually care about its future?" he snapped, finally turning to face her. His eyes burned with a hunger she recognized all too well, the hunger for power. "You're clinging to the past. Father is gone. You can't keep running this family as though he's still here." Her lips curved into a bitter smile. "You speak of your father as though he were just an obstacle in your way. Is that what I am now, Michael? An obstacle?" "You're in the way," he admitted, his jaw tightening. "And I won't stand by while everything he built crumbles, because you're too blinded by grief to see the truth." Fiona rose to her feet. At her full height, she stood regal, commanding, the weight of her presence filling the room. "Do not mistake grief for weakness," she said, her voice low but sharp as steel. "I have endured more than you can imagine, Michael. And I will endure this, too. If you want to tear apart this family, if you want to betray your own blood, then know this." She stepped closer, her eyes burning into his. "You will not do it without a fight." For a moment, silence hung heavy between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Michael's jaw clenched, his fists tight at his sides. Then, without another word, he turned on his heel and strode out of the room, the door slamming shut behind him. Fiona's hands trembled, though she refused to let them show. She waited until his footsteps faded before she sank back into the chair, her chest heaving with unspoken emotion. Maisie reappeared at the doorway, concern etched on her face. "Are you all right, ma'am?" Fiona forced a steady breath. "No," she whispered, almost to herself. "But I will be." As the rain lashed harder against the windows, Fiona realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm brewing within these walls. The betrayals had already begun, but this was only the beginning. She could feel it. Something darker was coming. Something that would test her strength in ways she had never imagined. And as the night deepened, Fiona Blackwood swore silently to herself. She would not be broken. Not by betrayal. Not by blood. Not by anyone. The following morning, the storm had cleared, leaving the skies over Windermere sharp and crystalline. The cliffs were slick with rain, waves crashing violently below, as if the sea itself mirrored the unrest within the Blackwood estate. Sunlight broke through heavy clouds, but it carried no warmth for Fiona. She sat at the grand oak table in the dining hall, untouched tea cooling in its porcelain cup before her. Maisie moved quietly about the room, setting the table as though habit and ritual could erase the tension that lingered like smoke in the air. Fiona's mind replayed every word from Michael the night before, every accusation, every sharpened edge of his voice. She had always known Margaret's influence was poisonous, but to hear her own son echo those whispers, echo them with conviction, cut her deeper than she had expected. She had barely slept. Her thoughts were interrupted when Maisie placed a folded letter on the table. "This came by courier early this morning, Mrs. Blackwood," she said, her voice low. Fiona arched a brow. "At this hour?" Maisie nodded. "The messenger said it was urgent." Fiona hesitated before opening it. The handwriting was unfamiliar, elegant yet hurried. As her eyes scanned the page, her frown deepened. "Mrs. Blackwood, I write to you not as a stranger, but as someone who believes the truth should never remain buried. What you think you know about Richard's death is not the full story. Meet me at the old Windermere Chapel at dusk tomorrow. Come alone. A friend." Fiona's hand tightened around the paper. A cold shiver crawled down her spine. Richard's death. After all these years, it was still a wound she couldn't close. The doctors had called it a heart attack, sudden and merciless. But to suggest there was more, that his death wasn't as it seemed, was a spark of suspicion she couldn't ignore. Maisie, ever perceptive, studied her mistress with worry. Bad news. Fiona folded the letter quickly, hiding it under her palm. Nothing that concerns you, she said, though her voice was softer than her words. She didn't want to involve Maisie, not yet. Before she could dwell further, the dining hall doors opened, and Margaret swept in. Tall and sharp-featured, dressed impeccably in navy silk, Richard's sister carried herself with the smug confidence of a woman who believed the estate was already hers. "Good morning, Fiona," Margaret said with false sweetness, sliding into a chair across from her. "You look tired. Rough night." Fiona set her cup down carefully. "You seem unusually concerned." "Oh, don't mistake me," Margaret replied, her smile cold. "I'm only thinking of the family. Michael was here, wasn't he?" Fiona's jaw tightened. "You've been busy, filling his head with your venom. I won't let you turn my son against me." Margaret's laugh was low, dismissive. "Turn him? Fiona, he came to me long before Richard's death, frustrated by your stubborn grip on everything. You've always been too sentimental, too emotional. Michael sees it. He knows strength when he sees it." Fiona's heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "Strength is not measured by how ruthlessly you tear down your own family, Margaret." Margaret leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "You're fading, Fiona. Everyone sees it. It's only a matter of time before the estate, the company, and Michael himself slip completely from your hands. Why not make it easier for yourself? Step aside. Leave Windermere. Take whatever dignity you have left and go quietly." The word stung, but Fiona lifted her chin. "I will not abandon Richard's legacy. And I will not be bullied out of my own home. You and Michael may scheme, but I will fight you until my last breath." For a moment, Margaret's smile faltered. A flash of irritation crossed her face before she quickly masked it. She stood, smoothing her dress. "Then may the best woman win," she said coldly before sweeping out of the hall. Fiona sat in silence, her pulse racing. The letter in her pocket felt heavier now, more urgent. Was it coincidence that it arrived the same night Michael confronted her? Or was there a deeper thread tying these events together? That evening, Fiona wandered the gardens to clear her thoughts. The roses Richard had planted years ago still bloomed, stubbornly clinging to life despite neglect. She knelt, touching a crimson petal, remembering his voice, his laughter. If there was truth hidden in his death, she owed it to him, and to herself, to uncover it. As twilight fell, she returned to the manor, only to find Maisie waiting in the foyer, flustered. "There's a visitor for you, ma'am. A Mr. Harold Whitmore. He says he knew Mr. Blackwood." Fiona's brow furrowed. The name was unfamiliar. Did he say what he wanted? Maisie hesitated. "He said he has something of Richard's. Something he believes belongs to you." Intrigued and wary, Fiona entered the sitting room where a tall man in his 60s stood by the mantel. His coat was damp from the mist outside, his silver hair slicked back, his sharp eyes fixed on her as though weighing every detail. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said with a slight bow. "I apologize for the intrusion. My name is Harold Whitmore. I worked with your husband many years ago, though not in ways he spoke of openly." Fiona's suspicion deepened. "What kind of work?" Harold paused, then lowered his voice. "The kind that dealt with secrets, risks, and enemies. Richard wasn't just a businessman, Mrs. Blackwood. He was a man who knew too much and trusted too few." Her stomach nodded. "And you've come now, after all this time, to tell me this?" "I've come because I believe his death was not as simple as you were told," Harold said gravely. From his coat, he produced a small leather notebook, worn and weathered. "This was Richard's. He left it in my care with instructions to deliver it to you if anything happened to him." Fiona's breath caught as she reached for it. The leather was cold, the pages filled with Richard's handwriting, notes, names, dates, some of which were underlined or circled in haste. At the very end, one phrase was scrawled, jagged and hurried. Trust no one, not even family. Her hands trembled. Her husband had known. He had feared betrayal even before his death. She looked up sharply at Harold. Why now? Why bring this to me after so many years? Because the shadows that surrounded Richard are moving again, Harold said. I thought they had died with him. I was wrong. If you don't act, they will consume you too. Before Fiona could respond, the sound of a car pulling up outside broke the tension. Maisie hurried in, whispering, It's Michael. He's back. Fiona quickly tucked the notebook beneath a cushion on the chair. When Michael entered, his gaze swept the room, narrowing at the sight of Harold. And who is this? Michael demanded, his tone sharp. A friend of your father's, Fiona said smoothly, her expression calm though her pulse raced. Michael's eyes flicked between them, suspicion clear. Strange. Father never mentioned him. Your father kept many things from you, Harold said bluntly, his gaze unflinching. Michael bristled, but Fiona stepped forward. Enough, Michael. Mr. Whitmore was just leaving. She met Harold's eyes with a subtle plea. Go before Michael digs deeper. Harold inclined his head and departed, leaving tension thick in the air. Michael turned on his mother. You're meeting strangers in secret now? What aren't you telling me? Fiona met his glare steadily. The truth, Michael, is that you don't know everything. And until you learn respect, you never will. Michael's jaw clenched. You're hiding something. I'll find out what it is. With that, he stormed out once more. Fiona exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her chest. The notebook beneath the cushion seemed to burn like fire, a secret too dangerous to ignore. She thought of the letter in her pocket, of the chapel meeting tomorrow. Too many threads were tangling around her, pulling tighter each day. As night fell, Fiona stood at her window again, the sea roaring below. Richard's voice echoed in her memory, his last smile, his last embrace. If what Harold said was true, if Richard's death was no accident, then the betrayal ran deeper than she ever imagined. And the storm was only beginning. The night of the chapel meeting arrived cloaked in mist, the kind that clung to the ground and blurred the edges of reality. Fiona stood at the edge of the estate's long gravel drive, a hooded cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders. The letter's words replayed endlessly in her mind. What you think you know about Richard's death is not the full story. Her instincts screamed at her not to go, not to trust anonymous messages that arrived at dawn. But something deeper, the need for answers, the ache of unresolved grief, pulled her forward. She drove herself, refusing to take Maisie or any of the staff. If the letter was a trap, she would not endanger anyone else. The road to the old Windmere Chapel was narrow, winding through thick woods. She had not been there in years, not since Richard's funeral service. The building had fallen into disrepair, its once proud spire now leaning precariously against the night sky. Fiona parked the car and stepped out, her shoes crunching softly against gravel. The chapel loomed ahead, its stained-glass windows cracked, its doors warped by time. Moonlight filtered through the trees, casting fractured patterns across the ground. She hesitated at the threshold, heart pounding, before pushing the heavy doors open. The hinges groaned in protest, echoing through the hollow chamber. Inside, shadows pooled in the corners, dust drifting in the air. The smell of mildew and damp would hung thick. Hello, her voice carried, hesitant but firm. I received your letter. At first, there was only silence. Then, from the far end of the chapel, a figure stepped forward. A man, tall and lean, dressed in a dark coat. His features were obscured by the low light, but his movements were deliberate, controlled. Mrs. Blackwood, the stranger said, his voice low and steady. I wasn't sure you would come. Fiona straightened, refusing to let fear show. You left me little choice. If you know something about Richard's death, I expect answers. Now. The man moved closer, into the dim glow of the moonlight filtering through a broken window. His face was rugged, weathered by years, his eyes sharp and watchful. My name is Edward Kane. I worked with your husband in ways few people ever knew. He trusted me with truths he couldn't share with anyone else, even you. Fiona's stomach tightened. What kind of truths? Edward hesitated, scanning the chapel as though wary of unseen ears. Richard was investigating something, people, dealings that threatened him, and everything he cared about. He suspected that someone close to him was involved. He feared betrayal. That's why he carried the notebook. Fiona's breath caught. The notebook Harold had delivered. He left it with Harold Whitmore. Edward's brows lifted in surprise. So, Whitmore finally gave it to you.
Good.
Then you know Richard's warning. Trust no one, not even family. The phrase echoed in her mind, more chilling now than ever. Edward stepped closer, his expression grave. Richard's death wasn't natural, Mrs. Blackwood. He didn't just collapse. He was silenced. The words hit like a blade to her chest. She staggered slightly, gripping a pew for balance. Silenced? You mean murdered? Edward nodded.
Yes.
Poison. Administered slowly, over time. Enough to weaken him, to ensure his heart would fail when the time was right. Whoever did it knew him well, knew his habits, his vulnerabilities. This was not the work of a stranger. Fiona's heart pounded, her throat dry. And you know who? Edward's eyes darkened. Not yet. But Richard suspected. He circled names in that notebook. Allies, enemies, business partners, even family. He didn't know who to trust. That's why he wrote that message. He feared betrayal from within. Fiona's knees weakened, the weight of his words pressing down. Her son.
Her sister-in-law.
Could it be possible? The thought was unbearable, yet the notebook's final warning screamed otherwise. Why tell me now? She demanded, her voice breaking. Because the same people who silenced Richard are circling you, Edward said. Michael's ambition, Margaret's whispers, they're not random. They're part of something larger, something darker. If you don't tread carefully, you'll end up the same way Richard did. Before Fiona could respond, a sudden sound cracked the silence. Footsteps outside, gravel crunching under hurried weight. Edward stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching inside his coat. Fiona's breath hitched. Who is it? The chapel doors creaked again. A shadow slipped inside, Michael. His eyes blazed with fury as they landed on his mother, then shifted sharply to Edward. So it's true, Michael spat. You've been sneaking around, meeting strangers in the dark. What are you hiding, mother? Fiona's pulse roared in her ears. Michael, you shouldn't be here. Michael's gaze flicked to Edward. And who the hell is this? Edward stepped forward, his voice calm but cutting. Someone who knew your father better than you ever did. Michael bristled, his fists tightening. You're lying. Father died of natural causes. Everyone knows it. Fiona's voice broke through, firm and steady. Not everyone, Michael. Not anymore. For a moment, something flickered in her son's eyes. Not fear, not grief, but anger. Anger sharp enough to slice. You're losing your mind, he said coldly. First Margaret warned me, and now I see it myself. You're paranoid. Dangerous. Maybe it's time this state was put in safer hands. Edward's jaw clenched. Careful what you say, boy. Truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep it's buried. Michael sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. Truth? Or your little stories meant to manipulate my mother? I won't let you twist her against me. He turned to Fiona, his eyes like shards of ice. Choose, mother. Him or me. If you side with strangers over your own blood, then you'll lose me forever. Fiona's chest tightened. The child she had once cradled, the boy she had once comforted, now stood before her as a stranger, threatening her like an enemy. She swallowed hard, pain and fury battling inside her. I will always love you, Michael, she said softly, her voice trembling with sorrow. But I will not be blind. If Richard was betrayed, if he was murdered, then I will find the truth. No matter what it costs me. Michael's expression hardened, any trace of softness vanishing. Then you've made your choice. He turned sharply, storming out of the chapel, the doors slamming so violently that dust rained down from the rafters. The silence that followed was deafening. Fiona pressed a trembling hand to her lips, fighting tears. Edward stepped closer, his voice low. "He's already under their influence," Edward said grimly. "Margaret, the others, they're pulling his strings. If you don't act soon, you'll lose him completely." Fiona straightened, wiping her tears, steel returning to her gaze. "Then I'll fight harder. For Richard. For the truth. Even if it means fighting my own son." Edward studied her for a moment, then gave a slow nod. "You're stronger than Richard ever knew. But strength alone won't be enough. You'll need allies. And you'll need to be willing to sacrifice everything." Fiona clutched the notebook hidden beneath her cloak, its weight anchoring her resolve. Outside, the mist thickened, wrapping the chapel in a shroud of secrecy. She knew now there was no turning back. The path ahead would be darker, bloodier, and filled with betrayal. But she would walk it, because Richard's death was not the end of their story. It was only the beginning. The evening had grown darker than usual, not because of the thick clouds smothering the moonlight, but because Fiona's heart carried a weight she couldn't quite name. She stood at the tall windows of her study, the faint reflection of her face staring back at her, drawn, pale, yet carrying an undeniable fire that refused to be extinguished. On the desk behind her, the old journal lay open, its pages whispering secrets she had only begun to comprehend. Each entry tied her deeper to a truth she was not ready for, yet unable to ignore. Every sentence written by her late mother seemed to crawl into her veins like a shadowy current. "Trust no one. Even those who carry your blood can turn the knife when you least expect it." The words burned into Fiona's mind. She pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to will the meaning away, but they clung tighter, wrapping her thoughts in thorns. The sudden ring of her phone shattered the silence. Fiona jumped, the jolt running through her like a crack of lightning. She reached for it with hesitant fingers. The number was hidden. Her instinct told her to let it go. But another part, curious, reckless, perhaps desperate, made her swipe the green icon. "Mrs. Blackwood." The voice rasped, low and unfamiliar, coded in menace. "You're in danger. What you've uncovered was never meant for your eyes." Her pulse surged. "Who is this?" The caller ignored her question. "You think the truth will set you free, but it will bury you. Walk away now. Leave the past in the past." Then the line went dead. Fiona stared at the screen, the silence that followed heavier than the words themselves. She could feel her own breath rattling as though the air had turned poisonous. She dialed back instantly, but the call never connected. The number was gone, vanished into the ether. Her hands trembled as she set the phone down. The warnings were no longer abstract whispers from old pages. They had stepped into her reality, alive and breathing. A knock rattled her front door. Sharp, urgent. Her heart froze. She hadn't been expecting anyone. For a long moment, she couldn't move. Every instinct screamed at her to stay still, stay quiet. But curiosity and fear are twin fires that burn in unison. She found herself walking, slowly, step after step, toward the door. Another knock. Louder this time. She reached for the handle, her hand slick with sweat. "Who is it?" she called, her voice tight. No answer. Only silence pressing back against her. Fiona inhaled deeply, bracing herself, and twisted the handle. The door creaked open, revealing no one. Only the cold wind swept across her porch, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke. But something was there. An envelope. Plain. Sealed in black wax. Her breath caught. She bent down, lifting it with careful fingers, as though it might explode at her touch. She closed the door quickly behind her, pressing her back against it, clutching the envelope like a live weapon. Back in the study, she broke the seal with trembling hands. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed in neat block letters. "You've already gone too far. The next step will cost you everything." No signature. No explanation. And yet she knew. Whoever sent this wasn't just a stranger lurking in shadows. This was someone close. Someone who knew her movements, her secrets, her every breath. Her eyes darted to the window, scanning the darkness outside. A prickle crawled across her skin, the chilling certainty of being watched. She clenched the paper in her fist, her jaw tightening. She had spent years living under grief, under silence, under the shadows of things left unsaid. But now, those shadows were reaching for her, threatening to drag her under. Fiona Blackwood would not let them. Still, as the night deepened around her, a single thought pulsed in her mind, colder than the autumn wind whispering through the trees. If the enemy was this close, then who among the people she trusted had already betrayed her? The sleepless night gnawed at Fiona, like a beast with sharp teeth. She had sat in her study until dawn, the black-sealed envelope lying on her desk like a curse, her mother's journal open beside it. By the time pale sunlight slipped through the curtains, Fiona's eyes burned with exhaustion, but her resolve had hardened. There was no turning back. At 9 o'clock sharp, she slid the journal and the ominous note into her leather satchel and left her house, locking the door with trembling fingers. The street outside was alive with the hum of ordinary life. Neighbors watering gardens, the bakery across the street pulling fresh bread from its ovens. But Fiona felt like she was moving through another world entirely, one cloaked in hidden dangers. Her destination was the university library, where her late mother once worked as a research historian. It was the one place Fiona believed she might find answers without prying eyes watching too closely. The smell of old paper and polished wood greeted her as she entered the grand building. Every step echoed faintly, as if the library itself carried secrets in its bones. She made her way up to the private archives, flashing her visitor's badge at the disinterested guard. She wasn't alone in the archive hall. A man stood at the far end, tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair brushed back neatly. He was flipping through a stack of reference documents, his posture precise, deliberate. Fiona froze, watching him for a moment. There was something both commanding and unsettling in the way he carried himself. Sensing her gaze, he looked up. Their eyes met, and Fiona felt the ground tilt slightly beneath her. His eyes were piercing gray, steady as if they could unearth thoughts she hadn't spoken aloud. "Mrs. Blackwood?" His voice was deep, measured. "Yes," she said carefully, clutching the strap of her satchel tighter. "And you are?" He closed the file in his hands and walked toward her with slow, deliberate steps. "Detective Adrian Locke. I was hoping I'd find you here." Her pulse jumped. "Detective? Why?" He paused a few feet from her, studying her face as though weighing her very soul. "Because someone doesn't want you asking questions. And when that happens, it usually means you're getting close to something dangerous." Her breath caught. The phone call. The envelope. The warning. "You know about the threats?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "More than that. I know your mother's research didn't end with dusty journals. She uncovered something, and it put her in the crosshairs of people who don't forgive curiosity." Fiona's grip tightened on the satchel. "What exactly are you implying, detective?" "I'm not implying." His voice lowered, more intimate now. "I'm telling you, if you keep digging, you may meet the same fate she did." A shiver coursed down her spine. For years, Fiona had believed her mother's sudden death was nothing more than a tragic accident. But now, Adrian's words struck like a blade, cutting open old wounds she thought were sealed. She drew herself up, her voice steadier than she felt. "Then maybe it's time I stop believing in accidents." Adrian's gaze softened, if only slightly. For a fleeting moment, Fiona saw something else in his eyes. Not just a detective's calculation, but something human, protective. And in that instant, she felt an unfamiliar current stir within her, fragile yet undeniable. Before either could say more, a sudden crash echoed from the far side of the archive. Both of them whipped around. A row of books had toppled over, but no one was there. Fiona's chest tightened. She knew what Adrian must have known too. Someone was watching them. Adrian stepped closer, his voice a low whisper. "Stay near me. This isn't just research anymore, it's survival." Fiona swallowed hard, her heart hammering, torn between fear and a strange spark of trust in this man who appeared like a shadow from nowhere. And as they moved deeper into the archives together, Fiona couldn't shake the gnawing truth. Trust itself was now the most dangerous gamble of all. The faint thud of falling books lingered in the air, its echo stretching like a warning. Fiona gripped her satchel against her chest, her eyes sweeping the shadowed corners of the archive. Nothing moved, yet she could feel it, that prickling sensation along her skin, the certainty of unseen eyes burrowing into her. Adrian took a step forward, his presence both grounding and unnerving. He moved with the quiet precision of a man accustomed to danger, one hand brushing against the edge of his jacket where she suspected a weapon rested. "Stay close," he said again, his tone low but edged with command. Fiona wanted to argue, to remind him she had spent decades surviving grief without anyone's protection. But right now, in this cavernous hall of forgotten records, she wasn't sure defiance would keep her alive. She followed. They walked deeper into the shelves, the scent of old parchment thick in the air. Adrian's eyes scanned constantly, searching for movement. Fiona's gaze, however, was drawn to a small iron door tucked at the end of the hall, half hidden behind a column of archives. She remembered her mother once mentioning a restricted collection, files that even senior researchers weren't allowed to touch. Her pulse quickened. Without a word, she moved toward it. Adrian's voice caught her. "Where are you going?" "That door," Fiona whispered, her hand hovering over the cold handle. "My mother used to talk about this place. If she left answers anywhere, it's in there." Adrian stepped beside her, his frame blocking part of the dim light. He studied the lock, a heavy, antique mechanism, but one that had been tampered with recently. The scratches along the metal were fresh. "You're not the first to come looking," he murmured. The thought chilled her.
Who had been here before them?
Adrian produced a slender tool from his coat and, with surprising ease, popped the lock. The door creaked open, releasing a gust of air that smelled faintly of dust and something metallic, blood or rust. Fiona couldn't tell. Inside was a narrow room lined with boxes and leather-bound ledgers. The air was heavy, oppressive, as though the walls themselves carried secrets too dark to breathe freely. Fiona stepped in cautiously, her hand brushing along the spines of the books until one caught her attention. Its cover was cracked, the title etched in Latin. She couldn't read it, but she knew it mattered. She slid it free. Adrian leaned close, his voice a murmur by her ear. "Take only what you need. If someone knows we're here." A sudden crash of footsteps outside cut him off. They both froze. The sound was heavy, deliberate. Not the random shuffle of a librarian. Someone was moving quickly, hunting. Adrian's eyes flicked to hers, sharp with warning. He motioned for silence, pulling her gently deeper into the restricted room, pressing her against the wall as the footsteps drew nearer. Fiona's breath came shallow, her heart slamming so hard she feared it would give her away. Adrian's hand brushed against hers as he steadied her, his touch firm yet electric, sparking a current she hadn't expected to feel in such terror. The footsteps stopped outside the iron door. Silence stretched. Then the door handle rattled. Fiona's grip on the ledger tightened painfully. Adrian reached into his jacket, pulling out a sleek handgun, holding it steady toward the entrance. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them breathed. After what felt like an eternity, the handle stilled. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. And then, just as suddenly, the footsteps retreated, fading into the distance. Fiona sagged against the wall, every muscle trembling. Adrian didn't lower his weapon until the silence had stretched impossibly long. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. "You see now," he said quietly. "This isn't about curiosity anymore. Whoever's behind this will kill to keep it buried." Fiona clutched the ledger to her chest, her resolve igniting like flint struck against stone. "Then let them try. I've lost too much already to walk away now." Adrian's eyes locked with hers, a flicker of admiration softening the steel in his gaze. "Then we'll fight this together." But even as he said it, Fiona felt the doubt coil inside her. Together. Yes. But for how long? And when the final knife fell, would it be Adrian himself holding it? The drive back to Fiona's estate was cloaked in silence, the kind that presses down heavier than words. Adrian's steady hands guided the wheel, his profile illuminated in fragments by the passing streetlights. Fiona kept her satchel close, her fingers brushing over the spine of the ancient ledger inside, as though reassuring herself it was real. Her mind, however, refused stillness. Every nerve was alive, every thought circling around her mother. Had she known her life was in danger? Had she hidden this ledger, knowing one day Fiona would find it? When they reached her house, Fiona moved first, unlocking the door with quick, sharp movements. Adrian followed, his gaze sweeping the shadows before closing it behind them. Inside the study, Fiona pulled the ledger out and set it on the desk. Its cracked leather seemed to breathe with age, whispering secrets through the faint scent of mildew and ink. Adrian stood behind her, his presence taut with silent anticipation. "Let's see what was worth dying for," she muttered, opening it carefully. The pages were handwritten in neat script, most in English, but scattered with notes in Latin, French, and a cipher she didn't recognize. Fiona flipped through until her eyes caught on a name. Her breath stilled. "Adrian," she whispered, pointing. This is my mother's handwriting." Dozens of entries followed, each one more unsettling than the last. They spoke of covert meetings, coded documents, and research into corporate dealings that extended far beyond academia. Names of powerful figures appeared, politicians, CEOs, investors, interlaced with warnings about corruption and silenced voices. But one entry made Fiona's blood run cold. "He knows. I fear the one closest to me has betrayed everything. If anything happens to me, Fiona must uncover the truth. Trust will be her greatest danger." Fiona's chest tightened painfully. Her mother hadn't died in an accident. She had been silenced, betrayed by someone she trusted. Her throat burned as she whispered. She knew she was being watched. Adrian leaned over, his expression dark. This ledger could topple careers, even governments. Whoever killed her is still out there, making sure no one ever reads these words. The weight of the truth pressed on Fiona's shoulders until she could barely breathe. And yet, beneath the terror was something else, an ember of fury beginning to burn. She snapped the book shut. "Then we can't stop. I won't let her death be erased." Adrian's hand brushed her arm, grounding her. His touch was steady, protective, yet it carried something more, something unspoken. "If you keep going, you'll put a target on your back. I won't always be able to shield you." Her eyes met his. The room seemed to shrink, the air thickening between them. For a heartbeat, she saw not the detective, not the danger, but a man whose own walls were cracking under the weight of connection. She opened her mouth to speak, when the sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. Both spun toward the source. A window in the hall had been smashed, the curtains flapping violently in the night air. Adrian pulled his gun, motioning Fiona behind him. "Stay down," he barked. But Fiona, heart pounding, couldn't look away. On the floor by the shattered glass lay another envelope, black wax, sealing it shut. Adrian retrieved it cautiously, tearing the seal with his gloved hand. Inside, a single line was typed in bold letters. "You were warned. The past is not yours to claim." Then beneath it, smeared in red ink, or perhaps something darker, was a single word. "Traitor." Fiona's stomach dropped. The warning wasn't just for her. It was a message about someone close. Her gaze flicked to Adrian, and though she tried to stop it, doubt gnawed at her like a vicious animal. What if the real traitor was standing in her study right now? The word stared back at Fiona, like a brand seared into her mind. Traitor. Her fingers tightened around the ledger until the cracked leather dug into her palms. She wanted to believe Adrian's steady presence, his protective stance, his eyes that carried an unspoken weight, but the message on that page whispered louder than her instincts. Adrian dropped the envelope onto the desk, his expression unreadable. "They're escalating. Whoever this is, they're getting bolder." "Or closer," Fiona murmured. Her voice was sharper than she intended, and Adrian's had turned toward her, his gray eyes narrowing. "What are you implying?" The tension in the room snapped taut like a wire ready to break. Fiona's pulse hammered. She took a step back, her breath uneven. I don't know who to trust anymore. My mother wrote that betrayal came from the person closest to her. And now this. She gestured at the blood-red word on the page. This is someone's way of telling me the same thing. Adrian's jaw tightened. He slipped the gun back into his holster, slowly, deliberately, as if to calm the storm rising in her. If you think I'm your enemy, say it now. But remember, I'm the only one standing between you and whoever smashed that window tonight. Before Fiona could respond, a sudden crash rattled the house. The sound of footsteps, several this time, thudded against the wooden floors of the hallway. Adrian reacted instantly, grabbing her wrist and pulling her toward the side door. Move! Fiona stumbled after him, her satchel bouncing against her hip. The ledger was inside. She clung to it like a lifeline. The house filled with the echo of intruders, men's voices low and urgent, the shuffle of boots against polished wood. Whoever they weren't here to scare her. They were here to end it. Adrian pushed open the side door, shoving her into the cold night air. The two of them sprinted into the garden, the sharp scent of wet earth rising around them. Behind them, shadows spilled from the house, dark figures moving with coordinated precision. Keep low, Adrian hissed, pulling her behind a stone wall at the edge of the property. Fiona's chest heaved as she crouched beside him, her mind a blur of panic and determination. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but there was no time. The intruders fanned out into the yard, flashlights sweeping across the grass like hungry eyes. Adrian drew his weapon again, his face set in grim lines. If they find us, we fight. Her blood ran cold. She was no soldier, no fighter, but her mother's words burned in her ears. Trust will be your greatest danger. The beam of a flashlight swept dangerously close. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. Adrian raised his gun, fingers steady on the trigger. The light inched nearer. Then a voice cut through the night, low but commanding. Enough. Bring them out alive. The intruders froze at the order. The light turned away. Fiona's eyes widened, her heart stopping as recognition struck. She knew that voice. She twisted toward Adrian, but his face was unreadable in the darkness. His hand pressed against her arm, urging silence. Her mind reeled. If the man giving orders was someone she knew, then the conspiracy wasn't distant. It was inside her world, wrapped in familiar skin. And worse, Adrian's stillness beside her felt almost too calm. The thought hit her like a blade. Was he protecting her, or delivering her into the trap? The night held its breath as Fiona realized the cruelest truth of all. Betrayal wasn't a distant threat. It was here, circling closer, waiting to strike. The city looked different to Fiona Blackwood that night, as though the skyline itself had secrets to whisper. Towering glass buildings reflected the sodium-yellow streetlights, their surfaces rippling with distorted illusions. Fiona sat in the back of a taxi, her reflection staring back at her in the rain-speckled window. There was a tautness in her chest, a tightening that wouldn't release, because tonight felt like the beginning of the end. The days following the disaster at Harrington Manor had been a blur. Edward had vanished, leaving behind nothing but questions and trails of confusion. Amelia's betrayal continued to sting like an unhealed wound, and Nolan's frantic search for answers had yielded more shadows than clarity. The secret ledger, still locked in Fiona's possession, seemed to pulse with menace every time she laid eyes on it. Within its pages lay the truth, or perhaps a trap waiting to destroy her. "Miss, are you sure you want to get off here?" the driver asked, glancing nervously at the nearly deserted street. "Yes," Fiona replied firmly. "This is the address." The cab pulled away, leaving her standing in the drizzle. A towering brick building loomed before her, once a textile factory, now converted into a labyrinth of artist studios and storage rooms. Tonight, it was supposed to host the one meeting that could change everything. Nolan had set it up, but Nolan wasn't with her. He had insisted she go alone, claiming it was safer that way. Fiona wasn't so sure. Her heels echoed against the wet pavement as she pushed open the heavy door. The hallway smelled of damp wood and paint thinner, and the single flickering bulb overhead bathed everything in a sickly light. Each step tightened the coil of anxiety within her. She had faced enough danger to know when she was walking straight into it. "Fiona," a voice called softly. She spun. Out of the shadows stepped a woman cloaked in a dark coat, her eyes sharp, her lips set in a line that carried both warning and sorrow. "Caroline?" Fiona's heart jolted. Caroline Blackwood, her estranged sister. It had been years since Fiona last saw her. They had parted in bitterness after their parents' death, torn apart by old wounds and sharper words. And now, here she was, as though resurrected from another life. "What are you doing here?" Fiona demanded, her voice wavering between anger and relief. Caroline's gaze softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again. "I came because you're in danger, Fiona. More danger than you realize. Edward isn't working alone. And Nolan." She hesitated, the words sticking like thorns in her throat. "What about Nolan?" Fiona pressed. Her pulse thudded in her ears. Caroline stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You can't trust him. He's playing both sides." The words cut Fiona deeper than she expected.
Nolan?
The man who had risked everything to help her? The man whose loyalty she had come to depend on, perhaps even lean on more than she should? Her chest burned with confusion. "You're lying," Fiona whispered. Caroline shook her head slowly. "I wish I were. I came here tonight to prove it. He's not who he says he is." Before Fiona could reply, a sound rattled through the corridors, a door slamming, heavy footsteps echoing, approaching fast. Caroline's eyes widened. "They're here." The sisters exchanged one brief, wordless look. Whatever resentment had once existed between them, survival now demanded unity. Fiona clutched the leather satchel with a ledger inside, her knuckles white. Caroline gestured toward a staircase leading upward. "This way," she urged. They ascended 2 flights, breathless, the echoes of pursuit growing louder. Fiona's heart thundered as she realized whoever had set this meeting had betrayed them. The factory wasn't a refuge, it was a trap. At the landing, Caroline yanked open a side door, shoving Fiona inside a dimly lit studio. Canvases leaned against the walls, their painted faces distorted in the gloom. In the center of the room stood Nolan. Fiona froze. He turned, surprise etched across his features. His eyes flicked from Fiona to Caroline, then back again. "You shouldn't be here," he said sharply. The footsteps outside grew closer, pounding like a war drum. Fiona's voice trembled as she asked, "Nolan, what's going on? Did you bring me here? Did you betray me?" His expression darkened, unreadable. "It's not what you think." Caroline stepped forward, fury in her tone. "Don't lie to her, Nolan. I know you've been feeding Edward information. I've seen the messages." Fiona's knees weakened. The room swayed. She wanted to scream, demand answers, but all she could do was clutch the satchel tighter, the ledger feeling heavier than ever. Nolan's gaze locked onto hers, burning with something fierce and conflicted. "Fiona, you have to trust me. Yes, I made deals with Edward, but not to betray you. To protect you. If I hadn't, you would already be dead." The footsteps stopped right outside the door. Silence descended, sharp and suffocating. Then, the handle turned. The studio door creaked open, the sound slicing through the tense air like a blade. Fiona's breath caught in her throat. Caroline instinctively pulled her closer, her body half shielding her younger sister as shadows spilled into the room. 3 men stepped inside, dressed in black, their movements precise and merciless. Their faces were hidden beneath masks, but the menace radiating from them was unmistakable. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Nolan shifted slightly, putting himself between Fiona and the intruders. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice hard and low. "Who are they?" Fiona whispered, her grip on the satchel tightening until her nails dug into the leather. "They're Edward's," Nolan said grimly. "And if we don't get out now, we won't live long enough to argue about who betrayed who." Caroline shot him a venomous look. "How convenient. The man who lured us here now claims he's saving us." Nolan ignored her, his eyes never leaving the men. One of them advanced, pulling a knife that gleamed faintly in the dim light. Fiona's pulse thundered. She wanted to run, but her legs were rooted in place. "Stay behind me," Nolan ordered. Caroline scoffed. "I don't take orders from liars." But even she hesitated as Nolan drew a small handgun from beneath his coat. Fiona hadn't known he carried one. The sight of it sent a jolt of fear through her. Fear not just of the men closing in, but of Nolan himself. In the chaos, Fiona's thoughts tangled like a storm. Caroline's warning that Nolan was playing both sides. Nolan's insistence that his deals with Edward were meant to protect her. Edward's shadow looming over all of it, a ghostly puppeteer pulling every string. The first man lunged. Nolan fired. The crack of the gunshot shattered the studio's silence, echoing off the walls like thunder. The attacker collapsed, his knife clattering across the wooden floor. The other two men hesitated just long enough for Nolan to grab Fiona's arm. "Move!" They bolted through a side exit, Caroline on their heels. Fiona's heart pounded as they tore down another flight of stairs, the sound of pursuit rising again behind them. "This way!" Nolan shouted, pushing through another door that led into a cavernous storage hall filled with old looms and crates covered in dust sheets. Caroline yanked Fiona to a stop. "Don't trust him," she hissed. "He's leading us deeper into the trap. Can't you see it?" Fiona's chest burned with indecision. She turned to Nolan. His eyes blazed with urgency, but there was something else there too. Desperation. "Please," he said. "I know what this looks like. I know I've made mistakes. But every choice I made was to keep you alive, Fiona. You have to believe me." Caroline's grip on Fiona's arm tightened. "And if you do believe him, you'll be signing your own death warrant." The words sliced through Fiona's mind. Every nerve screamed at her to choose, to decide whether Nolan was her salvation or her doom. But before she could speak, a chillingly familiar voice echoed across the hall. "Well," the voice drawled, calm and amused. "Isn't this touching?" From the shadows, Edward emerged. His tailored coat was immaculate despite the dust of the old factory, and his smile was sharper than any blade. His presence sucked the air out of the room, leaving Fiona trembling. "Fiona, dear," he said, spreading his arms as though welcoming her to a grand performance. "You've been busy, running around with ledgers, digging into places you shouldn't. But I must say," his gaze flicked to Nolan, "your choice of company is the most intriguing of all." Caroline stepped forward, fury trembling in her voice. "Edward, this ends tonight. We won't let you ruin her the way you ruined everything else." Edward laughed softly, as though she were a child. "Caroline, always so righteous. Tell me, how many bridges did you burn in your crusade? Or should I let Fiona discover that for herself?" Caroline paled, but held her ground. Fiona's heart twisted. Secrets, everywhere, layered lies and betrayals, and she was trapped in the center of it all. Edward's eyes locked on her at last, sharp and merciless. "Hand over the ledger, Fiona. Do that, and I'll let you and your sister walk away. Otherwise," his gaze slid toward Nolan, who stiffened under it. "Otherwise, I'll make you watch him die first." The hall fell silent. Fiona clutched the satchel, every fiber of her being screaming in conflict. Nolan's loyalty was uncertain, Caroline's honesty questionable, and Edward's menace absolute. Her choice now would decide everything. The silence in the hall was unbearable, stretching taut like a wire about to snap. Rain hammered the high windows of the factory, each drop striking like a countdown. Fiona stood frozen in the center of the storm, Edward before her, Nolan at her side, Caroline behind her. 3 paths, none of them safe. Her fingers tightened around the satchel. The leather felt like it was burning her palms, as though the ledger inside were alive, pulsing with the weight of every lie and betrayal it contained. She looked from face to face. Edward, smooth, commanding, smiling with predatory calm. Caroline, rigid, trembling, eyes wild with a mix of fury and fear. Nolan, tense, conflicted, his gaze locked on hers as if silently begging her to trust him. Tick-tock. Edward said lightly, his voice cutting through the thunder outside. Make your choice, Fiona. Or I'll make it for you. Caroline broke first. Don't give it to him, she cried, stepping forward. Fiona, listen to me. That ledger, it's proof of everything Edward's done. If you hand it over, he'll destroy it, and you'll lose your only chance to end him. Don't let him control you the way he's controlled everyone else. Her desperation was real. Fiona felt it in her sister's trembling words. Yet beneath it, there was something unfinished. Edward's earlier taunt about Caroline's bridges burned lingered in Fiona's mind. What hadn't her sister told her? Then Nolan spoke, his voice steadier, colder. If you keep that ledger, Fiona, he'll kill us all to get it. You don't understand the kind of power Edward has. He'll burn this city to ashes if it means keeping his empire hidden. We need to survive first. Then we can fight back another way. Two pleas, two choices, each demanding faith where Fiona's trust had been shredded. Edward chuckled, tilting his head. Touching, really. A family reunion, a lover's quarrel, all tangled around a book of numbers. You know, Fiona, I always admired your resilience. You're stronger than your sister, more cunning than Nolan. But strength has a price, and yours is about to be tested. His words slithered into her mind, but Fiona shut them out. She closed her eyes for the briefest second, listening not to them, but to the storm outside, to the pounding of her own heart. When she opened her eyes, her decision was made. I'm not giving it to you, she said, her voice clear, unwavering. Edward's smile faltered for the first time. Before he could respond, Fiona whipped the satchel open, pulling the ledger into the dim light. Its pages fluttered like wings, covered in Edward's darkest dealings. But she didn't hand it to anyone. Instead, she raised it above her head, her fingers gripping it like a weapon. You want it, she shouted, her voice echoing through the cavernous hall. Then watch me burn it, Caroline gasped. Nolan swore under his breath. And Edward's composure cracked, a flicker of raw rage flashing across his face. Don't, he snarled, stepping forward. The mask of charm was gone. The predator stood revealed. You don't know what you're doing. Oh, I know exactly, Fiona said, her hand hovering near a lantern on the crate beside her. The flame inside it danced, hungry. This ledger is your power. Without it, you're just another man with too many enemies. If I destroy it, I destroy you. For the first time, Fiona saw fear in Edward's eyes. Real fear. But then, Caroline moved. In a flash, she lunged forward, grabbing Fiona's wrist. Her grip was iron, her face twisted in desperation. No, Caroline shouted. You can't burn it. You don't understand, I need it. Fiona froze. You need it? Caroline's eyes blazed, tears welling at the edges.
Yes.
Because Edward isn't the only one in that ledger. I'm there too. The words slammed into Fiona, like a blow. Her knees nearly buckled. Nolan's face went pale, his hand tightening on his gun as he looked between the sisters. Edward laughed then, a cold, hollow sound. The truth finally slips out. Caroline, darling, always so noble until the debts come due. Did you really think you could keep your hands clean while profiting from my world? Fiona's breath came in ragged gasps. Betrayal upon betrayal, layered like poison glass. Her sister, the one who had claimed to be her protector, her ally, had been entangled with Edward all along. Caroline's voice broke as she pleaded, I did it for us, Fiona. For both of us. After our parents died, I had nothing. I thought I could control it, that I could use Edward's resources without becoming like him. Please, if you destroy the ledger, you destroy me too. The ledger trembled in Fiona's grip. Her sister. Her enemy. Her salvation. Her doom. The room swirled in silence, everyone waiting for her decision. The storm outside raged harder, as though the heavens themselves demanded an answer. Fiona's hand hovered closer to the lantern flame. The factory hall pulsed with silence, broken only by the storm hammering at the windows. Fiona stood at the center, ledger raised in one hand, the lantern flame flickering inches away. Nolan's gun was steady, Edward's sneer brittle, and Caroline's trembling grip chained Fiona's wrist. 3 voices clashed in her head. Burn it and end him. Save it and expose them all. Protect me, don't destroy me with it. Her throat tightened. She could feel every heartbeat like a drum of war, every second narrowing into one decisive moment. Edward's patience snapped. He lunged, his hand outstretched toward the ledger. Nolan fired. The shot rang out, the bullet grazing Edward's shoulder and sending him staggering backward with a snarl. "Run, Fiona!" Nolan shouted. But Fiona didn't run. She twisted, breaking free of Caroline's grip, the ledger still clutched tightly. Her sister stumbled, eyes wide, desperation raw. "Please, Fiona," Caroline begged, her voice ragged. "If you burn it, I lose everything. You'll damn me too." Fiona's gaze cut through her sister, then to Edward writhing with fury, then to Nolan, his face lined with fear, loyalty, and something unspoken. She realized then that no choice would come without a cost. But one thing was certain, she could no longer live bound by the chains of their corruption. She hurled the ledger into the lantern flame. The fire caught instantly, pages curling and blackening as heat surged through the air. Edward screamed, a raw, guttural sound that tore away the last mask of his composure. Caroline fell to her knees, hands outstretched as if she could pluck her sins from the fire. Nolan rushed to shield Fiona as the flames consumed the crate, smoke billowing upward. Edward charged again, wild and feral. Nolan stepped forward, intercepting him. The 2 men clashed violently, Edward's strength brutal, Nolan's movements desperate but precise. Fiona stood frozen for a heartbeat, torn between terror and awe, before instinct forced her forward. She grabbed a broken plank from the floor and swung, striking Edward across the temple.
He stumbled, dazed.
Nolan seized the moment, wrenching Edward to the ground and pinning him. "Call the police," Nolan barked, his chest heaving. But Fiona didn't move. Her eyes locked on her sister, Caroline, still kneeling, her face wet with tears, her gaze hollow. "You destroyed me," Caroline whispered. "Do you understand? You've destroyed me." Fiona's voice trembled but held firm. "No, Caroline. You destroyed yourself when you chose his world over ours." Caroline lowered her head, silent, broken. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each second. Nolan finally released Edward, his gun trained steadily on the man who had haunted their lives. Edward glared up at Fiona, hatred burning like acid. "This isn't the end," he hissed. "Burning that ledger won't erase me. I'll rebuild. I'll find you." Fiona stared down at him, her voice calm, resolute. "Then you'll keep finding fire." The authorities stormed the hall moments later. Edward was dragged away in chains, still cursing, still vowing vengeance. Caroline was taken too, though less violently, her sobbing pleas for forgiveness echoing through the cavernous space. When the chaos subsided, Fiona and Nolan stood alone in the smoky ruins. The fire had died down, leaving only ashes where the ledger had once been. Fiona's hands trembled, but her spirit felt strangely light, as though she had burned not just a book, but the weight of an entire past. Nolan stepped closer, his voice low. "You didn't have to do that. Burning it was dangerous." Fiona met his eyes, her own glistening. "It was the only way to make sure none of them could control me again." For a long moment, they simply stood there, the storm easing outside, the air between them charged with exhaustion and something deeper, trust reclaimed through fire. At last, Fiona exhaled, a fragile smile touching her lips. "It's over." Nolan shook his head slightly.
"No.
It's just beginning. But whatever comes next, we'll face it together." Fiona looked once more at the ashes, then at the man beside her. The pain, the betrayal, the losses, they would linger. But so too would the strength she had found within herself and the bond forged in the crucible of survival. And for the first time in a very long time, Fiona Blackwood walked into the night not as a victim of shadows, but as a woman who had chosen her own light.